2:03 a.m. Alaska Standard Time. The Arctic Ocean at this latitude runs at -27 degrees Celsius in mid-January. The ice shelf extends 400 nautical miles north of the Alaskan coastline, solid enough to support the weight of tracked vehicles, dark enough that even a full moon, which there was not tonight, would illuminate nothing. The airspace above that ice is monitored by a radar architecture that has been continuously operational since 1958, upgraded 17 times and never in its operational history required to do what it was about to do. At 2:03 a.m., the NORAD Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center received simultaneous track updates from 3 separate sensor sources: the AN/FPS-132 upgraded early warning radar at Clear Space Force Station in Alaska, the space-based infrared system satellite covering the North Polar region, and the AN/FPS-108 COBRA DANE radar at Eareckson Air Station on Shemya Island in the Aleutians. All 3 sources agreed on the track count, the origin, and the direction of travel. 14 tracks. Airborne. Heading southeast from launch points assessed as the Olenya Air Base Complex on the Kola Peninsula and the Engels II Strategic Air Base near Saratov. Aircraft type: Tu-160 Blackjack, the Russian Federation's largest and fastest strategic bomber, capable of Mach 2.05 at altitude, carrying up to 12 Kh-101 conventional air-launched cruise missiles per airframe under its variable sweep wings. The Kh-101 had a range of approximately 5,500 kilometers, a terminal accuracy of 5 meters against surveyed coordinates, and a flight profile that hugged terrain at low altitude to defeat radar coverage, the same penetration logic that had been built into every Russian cruise missile design for 40 years, now applied to a weapon that could reach Alaska's early warning radar network from a release point over the Arctic Ocean without the Tu-160 ever entering U.S. airspace. The 14 Tu-160s were not heading for U.S. airspace. They were heading for their weapon release points, positions over international airspace above the Arctic Ocean from which their Kh-101 salvo would be released and would navigate the remaining distance to their assigned targets independently. The assigned targets were not cities. They were not population centers. They were the physical infrastructure of the U.S. early warning and space surveillance architecture in the North Polar region, Clear Space Force Station's radar complex, Eareckson Air Station's COBRA DANE radar, the PAVE PAWS radar at Cape Cod, the eastern anchor of the early warning network, and the ground antenna uplink stations at Vandenberg and Schriever Space Force bases that maintained contact with the missile defense satellites whose data the entire intercept architecture depended on. The Russian Federation's targeting logic was precise. Sevier, the sensor network, and the U.S. loses the eyes required to generate intercept solutions for any follow-on ballistic missile launch. The Kh-101 salvo was not the strategic strike. It was the preparation for one. But the flaw in that logic was identical in structure to every adversary miscalculation in this framework. The assumption that the target they were attacking was the complete architecture rather than one layer of a redundant system. The early warning radars at Clear and Eareckson were critical nodes. They were not sole nodes. The space-based infrared system operated independently of every ground radar in the network. The COBRA DANE at Eareckson had a backup receiving mode that could operate on data from the ballistic missile early warning system satellites without requiring the ground antenna uplink stations the Kh-101 targeting list included. And most operationally relevant, the F-22 Raptors at Elmendorf-Richardson Air Force Base in Anchorage had been at 5-minute alert status for 3 days, following a NORAD threat assessment that had elevated to the highest peacetime readiness level after Russian strategic bomber activity over the Barents Sea had been logged as consistent with pre-strike positioning on 17 of the previous 22 days. The NORAD commander issued the intercept authorization at 2:04 a.m., 61 seconds after the first track confirmation. The F-22s were airborne by 2:09 a.m. The engagement geometry was unlike anything in the lower 48 threat library. The two 160s were flying at 40,000 feet over international Arctic airspace, the KH-101 still on their pylons, 2,100 nautical miles north of Anchorage. The F-22's combat radius was approximately 800 nautical miles without aerial refueling. The KC-135 tanker assets at Eareckson Air Force Base had been at readiness since the alert elevation 3 days prior. Two KC-135s were airborne by 2:12 a.m. on northern headings to pre-planned refueling tracks. The intercept timeline required the F-22s to reach the Tu-160 formation before the bombers reached their weapon release points, assessed at approximately 1,400 nautical miles from Anchorage on their current heading. At the Tu-160's cruise speed of Mach 0.9 and the F-22's maximum supersonic transit speed, the intercept geometry was calculable but not comfortable. The F-22 flight lead received the intercept heading from NORAD at 2:10 a.m. as his aircraft climbed through 35,000 feet into air cold enough that his cockpit temperature gauge was reading outside its normal calibration range. He set the heading and pushed the throttle to military power. The intercept computer showed a closure rate that would put him in visual range of the lead Tu-160 with approximately 41 minutes before the bomber's projected release point. 41 minutes was not a large margin over the Arctic Ocean in January at minus 27 degrees Celsius. While the F-22s were climbing north, the NORAD Operations Center was processing the threat geometry for the KH-101 salvo that the Tu-160s had not yet released. The 5th Air Force's Integrated Air Defense Network, the radar network covering Alaska, the Aleutian Chain, and the northern Pacific approaches, was not optimized for cruise missile defense at the same level as the theater ballistic missile defense systems in the Persian Gulf and Pacific theaters. The KUK-101's terrain-hugging terminal profile, flying at 50 to 100 meters altitude in the mountainous Alaskan interior, would put it below the radar horizon of every fixed early warning radar on the network for the final 300 to 400 kilometers of its flight path. The E-3 Sentry AWACS aircraft assigned to Alaskan Air Defense, which had been on airborne alert since 2 a.m. following the NORAD alert elevation, was the solution to that gap. The E-3 at altitude could look down into the terrain masking that defeated ground-based radar, tracking the low-flying KH-101s through the mountains and passing the track data to the F-15C interceptors at Elmendorf and the Passy 3 Patriot Battery at Fort Greely that had been repositioned to cover the approaches to Clear Space Force Station 2 days earlier. At 2:31 a.m., the F-22 flight lead reached visual range of the Tu-160 formation. 14 large white aircraft swept wing silhouettes against a sky that was not quite dark. The Arctic winter produced a twilight quality even at 2 a.m. that was neither day nor night, a gray luminosity that made the Tu-160s visible at 12 nautical miles without any sensor assist. The flight lead had not seen a Tu-160 in his operational career outside of airshow footage. He logged the formation count at 14, confirmed it matched the NORAD track count, and transmitted the visual confirmation on the intercept net. The standard intercept protocol for a strategic bomber in international airspace was a wings-level parallel approach, a visual identification pass, and a radio challenge on the international emergency frequency. The flight lead executed the parallel approach at 2:33 a.m. The lead Tu-160's crew acknowledged his presence. They did not alter course. At 2:34 a.m., the lead Tu-160's weapons bay doors began to open. The weapons bay door opening was detected on the F-22's passive infrared sensor and transmitted to NORAD simultaneously. NORAD's response was immediate. The engagement authorization for defensive intercept of cruise missiles after release was pre-delegated. What was not pre-delegated was authorization to engage the Tu-160s before release. They were in international airspace. They had not yet released a weapon. The intercept rules required a weapon release before kinetic engagement of the launch platform was authorized. The flight lead had 12 seconds between detecting the weapons bay opening and the first KH-101 separating from the lead Tu-160's pylon. He transmitted the bay open report to NORAD and requested clarification on release engagement authority. NORAD's response confirmed pre-delegation did not extend to pre-release engagement. He held his intercept position. The first KH-101 separated at 2:35 a.m. The second, third, and fourth followed in a 6-second ripple from the same aircraft. Then the second, Tu-160, opened its bays. Then the third. The release sequence ran across all 14 aircraft over a 4-minute window between 2:35 a.m. and 2:39 a.m. 112 KH-101 cruise missiles entered autonomous flight simultaneously over the Arctic Ocean, 1,400 nautical miles from their assigned targets, navigating south at low altitude toward the radar network that was supposed to be too busy with their approach to track them. Tu-160 experienced a weapons bay actuator fault on its port pylon after releasing 8 of its 12 assigned KH-101s. 4 weapons remained on the pylon, unable to release. The aircraft commander transmitted the fault on his internal net and held station. The 4 unreleased KH-101s would return with the aircraft. The salvo was 108 weapons, not 112. The operational effect of the 4 unreleased weapons was assessed as minimal. The target coverage matrix had been built with redundancy. The 4 aim points assigned to those weapons had backups from other aircraft in the formation. The NORAD Operations Center processed the 108 track count at 2:39 a.m. The engagement architecture activated across every available defensive layer simultaneously. The F-22s could not engage 108 cruise missiles in the terminal phase. Their M120 AMRAAM load and their airframe count were not designed for that volume against low-flying targets. Their role shifted immediately from intercept escort to sensor-to-shooter relay. Using their advanced sensors to track the KH-101 formation through the first 800 nautical miles of its flight path, where their own radar had the best geometry, and passing track data to the E-3 AWACS and the ground-based engagement systems further south. The F-15Cs at Elmendorf were the primary cruise missile intercept platform. Armed with AIM-12OD extended-range AMRAAMs, vectored by the E-3's track picture, they began their intercept runs at 2:51 a.m., 12 minutes after the last KH-101 had been released, with the formation now 340 nautical miles north of Alaska's coastline and descending toward their terrain following altitude. The F-15Cs engaged the KH-101 formation from the north, working south through the track file as the missiles navigated into the mountains. The KH-101's electronic countermeasures suite was a capable system. It carried a radar frequency jammer and a set of passive decoy dispensers designed to complicate the AIM-120's active radar seeker in terminal phase. Against a single F-15C, the ECM suite degraded intercept probability by an assessed 18%. Against 6 F-15Cs, working a coordinated engagement from multiple aspect angles, the ECM suite's effectiveness was reduced by the engagement geometry. Jamming one aspect angle while being engaged from another created a coverage gap the guidance system could not close. 61 of the 108 KH-101s were neutralized by F-15, CAIM-12OD engagements between 2:51 a.m. and 3:14 a.m. across the Arctic approaches and the Alaskan mountain corridors. 47 continued south into the terrain masking environment below radar horizon. The E-3 tracked 34 of the 47 through the terrain masking using its look-down capability. 13 entered a mountain valley corridor in the Alaska Range where the E-3's geometry was degraded by the terrain on both sides of the corridor. It could track the entry point and the exit point, but lost the tracks in the valley itself. Of the 13 that entered the corridor, 9 emerged at the southern exit and were immediately acquired by the PAC-3 radar at Fort Greely. 4 did not emerge. Post-engagement assessment assessed them as impacting terrain within the corridor. The KH-101's terrain following system was designed for the relatively flat terrain of European Russia and Central Asia. The Alaska Range's irregular mountain geometry produced navigation anomalies that the system had not been validated against. The 4 weapons self-neutralized against mountainsides they had not been programmed to expect. The 34 tracked KH-101s that emerged from the Alaska Range's southern slopes into the Tanana Valley were engaged by the PAC-3 Patriot Battery at Fort Greely, the F-15Cs repositioning from their northern engagement, and 2 Marine Corps ground-based air defense units that had been forward deployed to Fairbanks and Delta Junction under the elevated readiness posture 3 days earlier. The engagement was dense and overlapping. Multiple systems engaging the same airspace simultaneously required coordination through the E-3's air battle management function to deconflict engagement zones and prevent intercept-on-intercept fratricide. 26 of the 34 were neutralized in the Tanana Valley engagement zone. 8 continued south toward Clear Space Force Station and the radar complex. The PAC-3 battery's coverage extended to within 22 kilometers of Clear Space Force Station's primary radar array. It engaged the 8 remaining KH-101s as they emerged from the last terrain feature before the open flat ground of the Tanana River Valley. 5 were intercepted. 3 reached the terminal phase against the radar complex. The Clear Space Force Station radar operations crew had been in their hardened operating position since the NORAD alert 3 days prior, a reinforced concrete structure designed to survive significant overpressure. At 3:22 a.m., 1 KH-101 impacted the radar's primary transmission building. The building sustained significant structural damage. The primary radar array was rendered non-operational. The backup radar, housed in a separate structure 340 meters from the primary, was undamaged. It was online and providing track data to NORAD by 3:24 a.m., 2 minutes after the primary array was struck. The transition to backup radar operation had been rehearsed quarterly. The 2-minute gap in primary radar coverage had been logged, and the gap had been covered by the space-based infrared system and the COBRA DANE data feed throughout. The second KH-101 impacted the access road infrastructure and the vehicle maintenance facility adjacent to the radar complex. Structural damage, no personnel losses. The maintenance crews had been in hardened shelter positions since the NORAD alert. The third, KH-101's guidance system, was partially disrupted by the PAC-3 radar's jamming mode in the terminal phase and impacted open ground 1.4 kilometers north of the radar complex. No facility effects. At Eareckson Air Station, 2 KH-101s had been allocated to the COBRA DANE radar. The PAC-3 coverage at Eareckson was thin. A single battery, positioned for the most likely threat axis, which the KH-101s did not use. They had navigated around the battery's coverage through the island's southern approach, a route that placed them outside the primary engagement sector for their terminal run. One was acquired by the PAC-3 on a late geometry intercept solution and neutralized 800 meters from the radar building. The second impacted the COBRA DANE's secondary power distribution infrastructure. The radar's primary power remained on backup generators. It continued operating at reduced capacity. The PAVE PAWS radar at Cape Cod, Massachusetts, 3,400 miles from the Arctic release point, was the deepest target in the KH-101's range. 8 missiles had been allocated to it. The terrain they would cross, the populated northeastern United States, was not the featureless Arctic expanse. Every ANG base in New England had been alerted by the NORAD activation. F-15S from the 104th Fighter Wing at Barnes Municipal Airport and the 102nd at Otis Air National Guard Base were airborne and on intercept headings when the KH-101s crossed into New England airspace. All 8 were intercepted before reaching Massachusetts. The Cape Cod radar was undamaged. By 3:31 a.m., 88 minutes after the first NORAD track confirmation, the last KH-101 had been resolved. The active engagement phase was complete. The CENTCOM counter-operation architecture was not the relevant framework for this engagement. This was NORAD's theater and NORTHCOM's response. The counter-operation execute order had been transmitted at 2:44 a.m., 5 minutes after the release sequence completed, and had targeted the Tu-160 formation directly, now egressing north towards their return routes. The Tu-160s were still in international airspace. They had released their weapons and were returning to base. The rules of engagement for striking aircraft that had released weapons against U.S. territory from international airspace had been one of the most carefully reviewed legal questions in the NSC session that had authorized the response. The finding was that weapon release against U.S. territory from international airspace constituted an act of armed aggression under international law and authorized a defensive response against the launch platforms regardless of their current airspace position. 4 AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles, adapted for air-launched anti-bomber targeting under an emergency modification program that had been running for 18 months, were released from F-22s at 2:49 a.m. against the 4 Tu-160 assessed as having fully completed their release sequence and being on direct return headings. The AGM-158C at 560 nautical mile range could reach the egressing Tu-1600s before they cleared the international airspace boundary into Russian-administered Arctic zones. 3 of the 4 impacted their assigned Tu-160 airframes. 1 missed following a late evasive maneuver by the Tu-160 crew. The aircraft descended to low altitude, and the AGM-158C's terminal seeker lost lock against the ice surface return. The 3 Tu-160s that were struck were assessed as non-functional over the Arctic Ocean. The 4th Tu-160, with the weapons bay fault and 4 unspent KH-101s aboard, was not targeted. The rules of engagement required confirmation that the aircraft had completed hostile action. The bay fault data had been logged. The decision not to engage it was documented in the NORAD operational log at 2:47 a.m. The remaining 10 Tu-160s reached Russian-administered airspace before the AGM-158C engagement window closed. They were not engaged further. The geopolitical boundary had closed the window. At 3:44 a.m., the NORAD Operations Center updated the engagement status board. 14 Tu-160s had released 108 KH-101 cruise missiles. The overall intercept rate across all defensive layers was 97.2%. 105 of 108 weapons neutralized or self-terminated against terrain. 3 had produced effects on U.S. military infrastructure. Clear Space Force Station's primary radar array non-operational with backup online, Eareckson's secondary power distribution damaged with primary operational, 1 KH-101 impacting open terrain north of Clear with no facility effects, no U.S. personnel losses, no civilian areas affected. The Cape Cod PAVE PAWS radar, the Vandenberg and Schriever uplinks, and the broader satellite network were fully operational throughout. The NORAD duty officer who had issued the intercept authorization at 2:04 a.m. had been in Cheyenne Mountain for 11 hours. He updated the board and transmitted the status report to the NORTHCOM commander. The commander read the report, noted the 3 facility effects, and asked one question. Backup radar at Clear. How long until primary is assessed for repair? The duty officer checked the engineering status feed. 6 to 8 weeks. Primary operations on backup throughout. The commander nodded and closed the channel. Time from first track confirmation to end of active engagement. 88 minutes. Russian weapons employed. 14 Tu-160 strategic bombers releasing 108 Kh-101 air-launched cruise missiles from international Arctic airspace. 1 Tu-160 with weapons bay fault, 4 weapons unreleased and returned. Kh-101 intercept and neutralization, 61 by F-22 and F-15 CAIM-120D in Arctic approach and mountain corridors. 4 self-terminated against Alaska range terrain, 26 by PAC-3 and multilayer engagement in Tanana Valley. 5 by terminal PAC-3 engagement near Clear. 8 intercepted in New England approaches. Total neutralized, 104. 3 produced effects. 1 terrain impact with no effects. Combined neutralization rate, 97.2%. Effects: Clear Space Force Station primary radar non-operational. Backup online within 2 minutes. Eareckson secondary power distribution damaged. Primary operations maintained. 1 open terrain impact, no facility effects. Cape Cod PAVE PAWS undamaged. U.S. satellite network fully operational throughout. Counter operation: 4 AGM-158C engagements against Tu-160 launch platforms in international airspace. 3 Tu-1608s assessed non-functional. 1 Tu-160 escaped engagement window into Russian-administered airspace. 10 remaining Tu-160s not engaged after clearing the authorization boundary. U.S. assets: Clear Space Force Station primary radar requiring 6 to 8 week repair assessment. 0 personnel losses. 0 civilian areas affected. F-22 and F-15C formations returned to Elmendorf with fuel and weapon states within normal recovery parameters. The Russian Federation had deployed 14 of its most capable strategic bombers, flown them 2,100 nautical miles over the Arctic Ocean, and released 108 of its most advanced air-launched cruise missiles against the sensor network that anchored North American missile defense. The attack had been designed to blind the network before a strategic follow-on. The network was not blind. The primary radar at Clear was on backup within 2 minutes. Every satellite sensor had operated without interruption from the first track confirmation to the last engagement. The follow-on that the KH-101 salvo had been designed to enable had no degraded sensor environment to exploit. The architecture the Russian Federation had been building toward for 11 minutes of cruise missile flight time remained intact. What had changed was the Tu-160 force available to execute the next phase of whatever plan had produced this one. 3 airframes accounted for. 11 returned. The mathematics of strategic aviation attrition were their own message.